know that nobody really is thinking about that, but that is on its way, which is broadcast interaction. We've already had the first installment with the Captain Power game. You remember that game where you could shoot at the screen and you get, you get a result from the screen? This was a broadcast program. And kids were using this gun, and because of a game of an electronic system, you could get the gun to screen, and you could get some kind of flash system on the screen if you hit the right spot. I never quite understood. I think it was a lot of sleight of hand in it. Fact remains, electronic sleight of hand, magic. But the fact remains that people are working full speed now in the States and in Japan on broadcast interactive possibilities, where you will be able to interact with the screen, because now you already are more or less doing that by the cable television. And this is coming, and then what do we do? What exactly will that imply? You'll need a lot of artists to explain that one. Okay, I really wanted to spend some time talking about representation versus interactivity, but it's time's getting on. I find that maybe I should talk about, I'll make a resume of what I wanted to say. Basically this, that when you read, and not just every reading system, every orthography gives you that kind of power to that effect. But when you read the Greco-Roman alphabet, the one that you are using for learning to read and living your life now, you're basically taking a number of abstract symbols which you put together for sound symbols, but you don't necessarily translate this into sound. You can go directly from the writing to images. But what you are doing is that you are generating images in your brain which are representations of the words that you are reading on the page. This process of representation was only formulated in clear terms at the beginning of this century by Ferdinand de Saussure, and it was called the relation between the signifier and the signified. And signifiers were the things that were representing, and the signified were those things that were represented. And there was a third element which was called the reference, which was that which is in the world alluded to by the signified, by the representation. Now, what does representation do? And it's not indifferent to video recording or video taping, because it appears that on tape you're also representing. I say it appears because I don't think you are representing. You're acting. I'll explain what I say. Come back to what does representation do? Well, what representation did through the literacy development from Greece and Rome all the way to the 20th century Western writing system is to give to each individual reader power to get out of the prison of language. In an oral situation, you are totally contextualized. You are totally dependent on the oral situation around you. In a written, silent situation, you control language. And this control of language comes by representation, because you control representation. And the first thing the Greeks invented in order to make that representative model generalized in their community was theater. Theater was nothing if it wasn't the patterns, the precipitate of the cognitive function of representation that was brought in the culture by reading. Theater was turning a human situation into an external, distant series of effects which would explain things to people, which would explain their problems. And in fact, Greek tragedy was a kind of self-explanation by the Greek society of these problems as it was going in a transition from the period of a tribal, non-literate culture to a organized civic, a polis, a city, a democratic system, which changed a great deal of stuff. Theater, therefore, was the artist's contribution to the understanding of literacy, the understanding of a dominant change of cognitive processing, information processing in a culture. Then theater led to novels, because in order to read novels properly, you have to be able to formulate the maximum imagery in your mind so as to flesh out all these abstract terms. Now, novelists are responsible for the development of of sensibility in stages that you can read in the history of literature. Very clearly you can see how the sensibility of the Western man and society was developed by novel writing. That's never understood. People think of economy. That's why I was saying artists are more important than the economy. People think that the economy, Adam Smith and company, and the invention of the paper money, and the invention of and the distribution of trade are the major conditioner of societies and people's lives. Not at all. Artists in great numbers, at different level of proficiency, generated consciousness into and emotional responses into their audience, into their public, that made those audience and public change within and live with those experiences all their lives, not just for the moment they were reading. Because, as Foucault said, lots of people wouldn't have a clue about love if they hadn't read about it somewhere else. So, well, that could be an exaggeration. But even learning how to deal with an emotion such as love was very much the purpose of 17th century stage theater and novel writing throughout France, England, Italy, and the Western world. So that's a very significant thing. Now, what happens in the modern time? We don't really have great telegraph artists. Maybe telegraph isn't inspiring enough art. Maybe we should have telegraph art. Maybe we should invent it now. But definitely photography immediately brought on a tremendous interest on the part of art. In fact, it terrified, at first, painters, and then projected them into a completely different thing. Painters began to realize they didn't have to reproduce reality, something was doing it for them very well. So they began to deal with abstract expressionism, or first impressionism, and painter was very much influenced by photography, but you know all this, and I'm not going to go into that. Fact remains that there again, there is an art form that created a new kind of system. Now, what did photography and film do? They stood between the book and TV. They were editing systems. Photography is an instant edit of the environment. And when you add to that a succession of photographs and make it a film, you have also the editive movement. But the principle of film is already in photography. It is not the same thing as video. I'd like to again make a technological difference between television or video and film here. Video belongs to electromagnetic systems. It goes back to the telegraph. The history, the ancestry of video is the telegraph, the telephone, radio, and then television. And then computer come in at the other end of television. Film belongs to the world of the press. It belongs to the world of the printing press. It belongs to the world of inscribing information on paper or inscribing it on the material, on the source. It belongs to photography, and it belongs, of course, to paper. And it belongs to painting as well. That is like painting on the canvas. This is not to put down film. Not at all. It's just to say that when you're dealing with the press system, you are dealing with editing as a dominant feature of the organization of the art form. But when you're dealing with electronic systems, from the telegraph all the way to the computer, you are dealing with what I call a modulator. It is a misnomer to say that you are editing television. Of course you are. There's no other word to describe what you are doing when you're sitting at the editing table. But basically what you are doing beyond editing is modulating. You are modulating your audience. This is why the power of persuasion of TV is so powerful. It's like music. It's a flicker of light. It goes up and down and sideways. And it modulates you like a sound. It's not at all like a succession of images that you have a moment to assimilate and store. So that's a really important difference between these various art forms. But what I'm saying is, the principle of representation, which was brought in our culture and defines our culture by literacy, has not yet been challenged properly by art. Now, I'm not saying that video artists are not trying to do that, or that technological artists, such as people like David Rokeby, who is working in Toronto and who has created an interactive system, such as the guys who created this system. I'm not saying those people are not doing something about it, but I think conceptually it's important to challenge the representational model as you are making videos by the interactive model. Why? Because there are two reasons. The first one is that obviously the technology to make video interactive has now become available, and it will become more and more available. This whole system is available for any school of art. It's under $5,000, and the program itself of the mandala is about $500, which is the same price you pay for a word processing system. So it's becoming available, so there is a good reason to investigate interactivity. But the other one is